Buongiorno, benvenuti, good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of In Diretta Con. Today we are going to have the pleasure to have with us Luis Jiménez-McInnis, who is the Secretary of IFAD. So we are very pleased to have this interview, this time in English, with an important representative of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is headquartered in Rome. I'm not going to provide the further details about this organization, as Luis is going to provide us some more information about this important reality which is based in Rome. But I'm just going to give the floor for a few remarks from Demetrio, and then we're going to start the interview with Luis. Please, Demetrio.
Thank you, Alberto. I took the liberty of adding Luis to the stream because it would be just, a sort of ideal guest, whereas he's there in flesh and blood, although we are very far away because I'm in Milan, he's in Rome. Thank you, Alberto, for organizing all of this. It's a great pleasure to continue our, this series of interviews, this time with a guest that will speak in English to all the people that are following us. So thank you, Luis. As you have probably read in our brief introduction, Attendiamoci is a non-profit organization that works with young people. And the idea behind Attendiamoci is that we want to provide the youngsters a means to become the best part, of themselves. It's a bit complicated to translate in English what we actually do in terms of self-development, but I hope that there will be a chance to work together in the future, although what the International Fund for Agricultural Development does is at least seems on the superficial level a bit different from what Attendiamoci does. But at the core and the essence of what your work is, I think that there are points of contact with Attendiamoci. So once again, thank you for being here with us, and I leave the floor to you, and I'll just go into the background so to listen to your wonderful words. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you so much, Demetrio, and many thanks for your remarks. So I think that everybody now here is very curious to know who is Luis Jiménez-McInnis, and so I kindly ask you, Luis, to please briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Demetrio. Thank you, Alberto, and thank you for this opportunity to give you a little bit introduction about myself, as well as IFAD, where I work. I think non parlo in italiano, così mi puoi capire meglio con questo accento che è molto difficile. But my name is Luis Jimenez, and I am from Panama. I have been in Rome now for about 11 years, working with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I would say my background has been quite linear in terms of my professional background. As somebody who was very young, both in school, in high school, as well as in university, my focus was always international relations and political science. Those are very much the areas of interest that I was very much wanted to work on. Originally, I wanted to continue, I would say, in the political realm, but more in the academic side. So was somebody who was planning on continuing after a master's into a PhD in political science. But lo and behold, attended a career fair to work at a think tank called the Council on Foreign Relations in New York when I was studying in the United States, and was hired to work there to be a researcher. And from there, I have to say, immediately ended up in a career at the United Nations, where I have been for the last, plus more than 20 years. I started in 1999 in the United Nations Development Program, working in the Office of Development Studies, which was basically their think tank. I worked in the UN Secretariat in the Department of Political Affairs, working on issues related to peace and conflict in the peace talks between the government of Colombia and the FARC, as well as the ELN. Also worked in the Secretary General's office under Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and was working on climate change issues, global food issues, public health issues, global public health. And that's what really prompted me to come to IFAD. After working on so many, decided there was an idea to really concentrate on one of those. And I came to IFAD in 2010 to work as special advisor to the then president, Kanayo Nwanze. Worked also as a director for partnership and resource mobilization. And now I am the secretary of IFAD, which makes me responsible for governance-related aspects, working with the executive board, the governing council, and all of the subsidiary bodies of the fund. So in a nutshell, I would say that is my background, a very roundabout route to arrive here in Rome and to work on food and agriculture issues, but always within the UN system, which is where I have spent the larger part of my career, at least 20 years. Over.
That's very impressive, Luis, and I think that it's also very inspiring for the young people that actually joined our organization and actually participate to our activities in many fields which are related to international relations, but not only, also to entrepreneurship, agricultural development, and so on. And at this point, I actually want to ask you, especially when you were younger, when actually you were at the university, which had been the main reasons that led you to embark on an international career?
I have to say, for me, it's really, it's hard to pinpoint one specific thing. But I was always somebody who was very interested in current events and the news. And I still am to this day. And it's, now with the internet, it's obviously horrible because you can continue reading the news for hours and hours on end. But it really was that idea of interest of what is happening in the world. My family also was one, we did move a lot when I was a child, generally between, being from Panama. My father was in banking, so it was always Miami as well as New York, and back and forth and to Panama as well. So I do think that generally had an idea in terms of creating that international landscape, or that international perspective in terms of the way one looks at things. My studies, I would say, were also very much oriented along that line. Because really the experience that I had growing up, in Panama, many of you may know it or may not know, it's a small country. I think now the population is about 3 million people, so very, very small. We have a canal and we have lots of services, but it is a very much an outward-looking country in terms of the perspective, because we are so small. And I think for me, it was really that idea of making a difference in my daily life. And I think, for those young people that are watching or tuning in, I imagine they're tuning in precisely because they have that same interest in making a difference in their communities, and but also making an impact in what is happening in the wider world. Because I think that's what attracts a lot of us into the UN, because it is a place where many decisions are made at the global level. And generally, there is that idea that there is an opportunity to improve the world that we are in. That I would say, those of you that you are working on all of this are also very much interested in. Over.
This is very interesting also because it reminds me the fact that actually, you're coming from Panama. There is a sort of, of comparison with the fact that actually our organization is based. I was born in Reggio Calabria, which actually is on the Strait of Messina. So there is this sort of potential comparison. And I mean, and actually it's a beautiful comparison that can be done. And I think that sometimes coming from a place where actually the scenery is in a certain way narrowed by the presence of mountains or whatever, you don't have the open horizon, actually makes you even more willing to travel and discover the world. And etc., etc. I think that is something really inspiring. But coming back to your role in IFAD and to make our audience understand what IFAD does in its daily work. So you currently serve as IFAD secretary, and so we would like to know what does it mean, and so which is your role in an international financial institution and specialized agency of the United Nations.
No, but just to agree with you 100%, I think those of us that are from the smaller places tend to look outwards more, precisely because yes, it is so small, and I think yes, but it's always good to go back to your roots. And I, except for COVID, this is the first time in many decades that I have not been home for Christmas, because obviously was unable to fly. So hopefully, hope to be vaccinated at one point soon, so I can go and see my family that I have not seen. Although I do have family here in Rome as well. But just to go to your question with regards to the role as Secretary of IFAD. I think obviously for me, and it's very much related to all of the work that I have done at IFAD, but also in the UN system. Right now, basically, my main issue is to work with members of IFAD, the member states of IFAD. We have 177 member states of the countries of the world, not the full United Nations membership, but a large part. And they are the ones that basically provide us with the strategic direction in terms of the work that we need to do to work with rural communities, rural development, and small-scale farmers, smallholder farmers throughout the world. To give you an idea, I think, right now my role is very much at the governance level in terms of making sure our executive board, our governing council, our board chair, our governing council bureau really keep the governance processes going. Just this year, for example, we've had to take all of our governance processes virtual, just like this meeting today. Under normal circumstances, I would hope we would have had the opportunity to meet in person in order to do these briefings, but we've been forced to hold these meetings virtually. So my role has been on basically transferring what we would normally do in a boardroom into the virtual realm. So just this February, we held our governing council virtually, which was a first for IFAD. And there was quite a work that had to be done there in terms of both legally, but also logistically, in what to do in terms of the information and computing and technology colleagues in terms of moving that forward, working with Zoom, which is the platform we've been using and that a lot of UN entities have been using. But I think the real reason, obviously, is why we do this. And for those of you that may not be as 100% familiar with IFAD, and this is why I was very much attracted to working there, was really around the period of the food crisis, the food and fuel crisis around 2007, 2008. And I think, for many of us that work in this sector, but just in general, know that, it is very difficult to stomach the fact that, small scale producers or smallholder farmers are producing the bulk of the food in the rural areas of the world and in developing countries. Yet they are the ones that are suffering the most from hunger in many parts of the world. And this is something we've seen in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, whereby we're supposed to end zero hunger by 2030, which is a very laudable goal to move forward to, and something we should all be striving for. But we have seen that there have been setbacks over recent years, and I think the COVID pandemic is really something that has even created further setbacks for the international community and for countries specifically. But I would say really what attracted me to IFAD is the fact that it is an international financial institution as well as a UN specialized agency. So we do loans and grants to developing countries in order for them to carry out development projects that work towards rural development, that work in the field of agriculture, but all other aspects really for the benefit of rural areas, which is where most of the world's poorest people are actually found. And as I mentioned, this issue of if we want to really get to zero hunger, if we really want to attack and commit to ending poverty and hunger, then we have to go where the areas where this most lies, and this is precisely in the rural areas of the developing world. Having said that, I do think there are issues with regards to the work of IFAD that are completely related to the rest of the world, because of the fact that, yes, we need to create rural areas that are attractive to young people. Rural areas that actually allow for employment creation. I know, for example, being based here, but it's not just in Italy, but in many countries, the issue of migration is one that is obviously a controversial one, or one that creates quite a bit of concern. And I think for those of us working in the rural space, rural issues generally, and the migration issue often begins in rural areas. And then from rural areas, people move to urban areas of their own country. Then from urban areas of their country, if there is no solution, there to another country. And then from there to another continent, if the solutions do not allow for it. So again, it's this opportunity to create that sort of impact where people can come in. And, I'm proud to say that, we don't have IFAD projects. We have IFAD supported projects, because we work with countries and we work with communities in terms of them determining their needs and where they would need to use the funds to make the greater impact. Over.
That's amazing, and it's very impressive. And actually, I think that it gives a very, very good understanding of what really development cooperation means. And I think that this is very, very important in order to make people understand that actually how great efforts and how impactful can be the action of these multilateral institutions that actually sometimes are not really known to the general public, but it actually works behind the scenes so hard in order to, especially in such a complicated period as the one we are living at the moment, in order to make things work smoothly at a global level. And the very interesting thing that I can that actually I can perceive from your word is that IFAD does have this very, very this global, of course, approach to its to the problems as it is a multilateral institution, but at the same time, the effort that it does in order to support rural areas is really, really fascinating, as there is this great equilibrium between the multilateral dimension and the local rural perspective. So from this point of view, I just want to ask you, what do you think IFAD can do in order to make does do in order to make a difference in rural areas in developing countries, and if you have some specific examples from your most present experience?
No, thank you for that. No, I mean, I would definitely say, the impact in rural areas is something very striking. In my current role, I am very much stuck in, now the virtual world, but now in the boardroom. So I am not doing as many field visits as I used to do when I was working with the former president of IFAD directly as his advisor. But I can really just mention, a few of the examples of seeing, in places like in the Sahel, where there was very little rainfall, where IFAD-supported projects have been working with local communities in terms of them working on water techniques, on how to collect water. Small projects such as that can make a huge difference in terms of farming, but just in general. I remember also visiting a project in China where there was also, an area where there was, very little rainfall, where IFAD was working with the local government in terms of doing this steppe agriculture, exactly for the same purpose of collection of water. I think I'm mentioning a lot of water because climate change is on everybody's agenda these days. So these are the things that really come to mind, but just really how to allow farmers to increase their productivity. The major, and I'd say one of the larger impacts of IFAD in terms of really what it does in the work is really how to organize smallholder farmers. And this is something that works both in terms of working with the public sector as well as governments, but also working with the private sector, how to organize smallholder farmers so that they have a common voice, and so that they do work together in the way they sell their products or their crops, and cooperatives obviously being a very important way of doing so. And I think an area where I've actually learned quite a bit from Italy in terms of how that does that. So I do think, really, one of IFAD's real hallmarks is really that way of organizing and working with smallholder farmers so that they do have a common voice in terms of inputs, when they need fertilizer, when they need seeds, when they, machinery, whatever you may need, but also in terms of when they need to sell, that there is they know the latest information of what the crop price is, the crop price for their individual, because I think, if a buyer goes to them individually, they have less of a chance of getting more revenue than they do if they do it collectively as a voice. I would say, I think, there's quite a lot in terms of what IFAD does in sharing knowledge between countries. And again, this issue of, ways of generating employment. And I think that's really, again, the other hallmark I would mention here, to have this recognition that farming is a profitable activity. Farming is a profitable enterprise for young people, but just for anybody in general. There is money to be made in farming, not only in the sense that, yes, that people farm subsistence farming, so that they can have enough food to eat themselves, but really that they have, enough to generate revenue, enough to generate income. I think, something that I saw in my travels, and I would say all of my colleagues at IFAD would really mention, is that in the end, everybody, regardless of where you're from, Panama, south of Italy, developing country where I visited IFAD supported projects, you want a better life for your children, you want better opportunities, you want to have education, you want to have that after you finish your education, you have an opportunity for a job. And I think that is universal. And the role of IFAD is really in ensuring that chance and opportunity for those in the rural areas of the developing world. Over.
That's really impressive, and also actually I really appreciate the referral to also to Italy, and also to the situation of whatever. The reality is that these things really matter wherever it is actually. So it doesn't really matter if it is the south of Italy or Panama. So you really have to be committed with the needs of the communities, and actually their inspirations and their aspirations in this sense, and then be close to the local communities and to the rural communities in order to have a positive impact, and also to be a meaningful impact for those communities that sometimes don't even know the organization, even if there are very, very big projects behind. So before leaving the floor for some very few last questions to Carla, I just want to address you a very last question regarding Italy. As you know, it's a very important year for Italy, as there is the G20 and the COP26. So which message do you want to address to young Italians, and especially to young Italian entrepreneurs who want to invest in agriculture?
I would definitely say, by all means, I think, the COVID pandemic has shown many things related to the work of IFAD and agriculture. I think the first being that, not that we needed the pandemic to make us realize, but, global problems require global solutions. And I think, yes, that, a virus that begins anywhere in the world can spread very quickly given air travel. And it will not be enough to just vaccinate. Even if everybody in one country gets vaccinated, it doesn't mean that there's going to be issues elsewhere in the world, because, yes, as we're now seeing, there's new variants. So I think really, yes, the global problems require global solutions with COVID is very important. But I would also say, I mentioned climate change. I think that's another one where we're going to see the same thing. It's not that any country can protect itself and without supporting others, because it is something. Migration being the other example. But I would say, yes, in order to make the case for agriculture, there is quite a bit in terms of, food systems, and there's a lot of talk of a food system summit that will be taking place later this year, and there will be a pre-summit here in Italy, actually. And I think that really is an opportunity for people to get involved in agriculture, but just in general in areas related to international affairs. I don't think you have to be working at IFAD in order to be making an impact, or working at the UN in order to be making an impact. In many ways, I would say those that are working directly in agriculture, whether they want to make an investment or whether they're doing directly, they have, a lot of knowledge to share around the world, and with other countries and with other regions. So really, I think that would be, my real call, that one, particularly for young people, you don't have to wait until later. You can really start making an impact now in terms of what is the world you want, both at the local level, at the regional level, but also at the global level, and really just to get involved. I think, finding spaces to get involved is really something, so that young people do have a voice in terms of what is happening. I jokingly say to some of my colleagues that, somebody much younger than me could probably set up an IFAD of their own with a website, and have, a big impact as well in terms of what they're doing, because of their knowledge and how these things work, both in terms of, the fundraising, but, some of you may have seen these websites where you can connect directly with a farmer and directly invest in them. So I do think, yes, this idea to get involved now in whatever way, because I think, in many ways, it's not only those of us working in international organizations that are having an impact internationally, but in many ways, those are operating in the private sector or in civil society organizations can have just as large, if not a larger impact, just depending on where they operate and how they operate. Over.
Perfect. So now I think that actually Carla, based on these very, very meaningful words, actually she's gonna add something to our discussion. For some follow-up questions coming from Carla herself and from our community and our audience. So over to you, Carla.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. And for me also, being as a student in international relations, is very interesting to hear first-hand experience. So we have collected some questions, and one of them is that it says, according to IFAD, rural women make up 43% of the agricultural workforce in developing countries. So how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected rural women? And what should the international community do to protect them?
No, I think, yes, these figures, somebody's been looking at the information, and they have the more firsthand information than I do. But yes, I think this issue of the COVID pandemic is just that this recognition, and I'll get to this, and when we're discussing as to what the international community should do, is really specific, towards women. And it's just that fact that the COVID pandemic has affected people differently. If it has affected people in rich countries differently than people in poorer countries. It has also, even within countries, affected, people differently, and it has affected in many ways women different than men, and children also different in even just the way the virus operates. But one of the issues, and I will start with that, 43% of the workforce, is that, yes, that in many countries, it is a fact that the vast majority of smallholder farmers in rural areas are women, simply because of the fact that men often will go to the urban areas in order to find other forms of employment. And that leaves you, basically, it has impacts not only in the work of women, but also in the families, where, a lot of the men are often in urban areas. But to get to the specifics of COVID, I think it is the situation that we have seen not only in developing countries, but just throughout the world, that yes, it is, with virtual things, with schools being closed, it is often, unfortunately, women that have to bear their direct responsibility for the childcare. in that situation. So that definitely means that they're often the first that have to drop out of the workforce, if that is, of the remunerative workforce, because taking care of children or taking care of the home is definitely work. It's not by any means not work. So that is something. And I would say that's really where interventions, that be it by governments or be it by private entities, have to take that into account. That, women, if given the same opportunities, perform as well, if not better. But it is that the interventions must take into account that, yes, you can't necessarily just say, I'm going to provide loans to all women and then not do anything about the schooling or the childcare situation. Because then if you say we can increase financing and we can provide loans to beneficiaries, those that are going to be more readily available are going to be the men and not necessarily the women. So there's many other issues that have to be tackled if we really want to make a direct impact. And I think that's, part of the rationale why IFAD says, that interventions are specifically targeted at women, means exactly that you're looking at all the other issues that are affecting them.
Yes, in effect, actually, women are it's a very important theme, and also it's related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's an actual issue, and there is a lot to be done. And I don't know if we have time for just one more question. What steps has IFAD taken in order to address the current crisis and to ensure a smooth implementation of its strategy?
No, just to mention, we have established a rural poor stimulus facility that is looking precisely at countries that need to, I guess, reinvigorate their programs in light of the pandemic. I think, as I mentioned, countries have been affected differently, but one of the main issues, in addition to this rural poor stimulus facility, where I have to say member states, of IFAD have been quite forthcoming, because they do recognize that there is an importance in rural areas in providing funds that we can provide specifically to this aspect of COVID-19, is really just in terms of the operations. I think in some countries, operations were able to continue to a certain extent. We have also been quite creative in doing virtual supervision missions, so that, yes, not the entire people that may have gone from headquarters or from even the entire country office are able to participate in supervising what is actually happening. But I would say one of the many things we've been doing is working with countries in essence, in terms of they want to restructure projects. For example, if you were planning on doing a project before the pandemic, and due to trade routes or due to basically, economies falling or demand falling, is really so that countries can restructure projects and do them differently in light of the pandemic. And this has been an ongoing conversation with member states and with those that are taking out loans from IFAD, so that they can really repurpose them to respond to the current crisis.
Thank you very much for your answers, and I think that's it for now. Questions, okay.
Many thanks, Carla, for your intervention. And actually, there was actually a very quick further questions that maybe just to clarify a little bit on the Rome UN-based agencies that I wanted to show you. So actually, yeah, I know that maybe it can seem. But actually, yes, there are all these organizations in Rome, and actually there is not real awareness of their activity. So maybe, Luis, it's something that you can quickly clarify.
Sure, and I hope my colleagues from FAO and WFP are not listening, because the easiest way is to simplify it, and it's not very simple. But I think IFAD is definitely the smallest of the three. And the one that people know the least about. So I'm glad you gave me this opportunity to speak and to highlight. But I would say IFAD, and a major difference, and I'll start with IFAD, is we really do work as a international financial institution. So we provide loans and grants to government. So I don't want to say we're a World Bank or we're, one of the regional development banks, but we do operate a lot more in that international financial institution manner, in the sense that we are providing loans to countries for agricultural programs and projects, or rural development agricultural program and projects, which is very different, I would say, from FAO and WFP operate, and the rest of the UN system, frankly. Since I wear a governance hat as secretary, in the UN, you often hear quite a bit of this one country, one vote. At IFAD, it's weighted voting, because we operate like the World Bank and the other financial institutions operate. So the vote is basically based on the contribution you provide to the fund. I would say that the main, if I could very briefly summarize, FAO is very much the largest and the norm-setting institution. If we want to talk about the food and agriculture world, it would be the most equivalent to the UN Secretariat. This is where a lot of the norm-setting, as well as, frankly, the information on food and agriculture is generated. Whereas WFP is definitely an emergency operation institution, and this is where you see when there is a situation of crisis, conflict, famine, this is where WFP come in. So in essence, if you want to say that there's a continuum between the humanitarian and the development, WFP is on the hand of the humanitarian, IFAD and FAO would be are on the development. And even though I would say FAO does operate within that larger spectrum, but it is WFP who does most, and in a very targeted and distinct way. But FAO also has that aspect, which is very much related to the norm setting, and also in terms of the research. If you want to get the latest research on what has happened on food and agricultural production, everyone in the world goes to FAO for that. And for us, it really is that nimble UN specialized agency that works with loans and grants. And I've heard us referred to as the UN's best kept secret. So, but we want more people to know about it. So I'm glad you gave us that opportunity.
Great, Luis. Many thanks for this very last clarification on I think it is important, to distinguish and actually to make people, the larger audience possible, aware about the importance and how cooperative is the work between these UN agencies, and actually which important role they exercise in Europe, but all over the world and in developing countries. So I really think that I really thank you for this very, very inspiring opportunity. I'm cautious of time, so we are concluding, but I want to thank you, Demetrio and Carla, for the contribution, and all the audience that for listening to this very, very interesting interview, and of course to you, Luis, and to the IFAD for this opportunity, hoping that there are going to be further occasion for collaborating, and of course to meet in presence after the end of the pandemics. So really thanks for your time and for your inspiring words.
Thank you very much to all of you, and I look forward to hopefully being able to meet in person.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day and buona serata.
Ciao, grazie.
Arrivederci a tutti e grazie mille per il vostro ascolto. Alla prossima puntata di In Diretta Con.